Good morning, TGIF. It is 10:47, February 27th. Hope everyone's doing good. So yeah, thanks again for the support. I got last couple of weeks or so. We've gotten a nice group of new subscribers. So thanks again to for everyone who feels inclined to support this weird thing that I do. I really appreciate it. Super fun. I try to do it every day. I've been setting. I bounce back and forth. I mean, I'll be there's obvious times when I can't always do a video every day, or something comes up. But I generally do, and sometimes I will set videos up as premieres just to kind of break up so things don't get too monotonous. And so the other thing that I try to do is, like, if I'm going to be away for maybe a couple days or so, I will, try to maybe get some videos prepped or ready to go. So I'll be I'll be going away for a good chunk of next week. I will be out of town, so I won't be here at Film Fanatic headquarters. So I'll be, you know, setting videos up as premieres, so they'll come and appear magically probably during next week. I'm going to be doing a little tour next week with Osmia, which I'm pretty excited. I think we're leaving either Monday or Tuesday night, and when we get back, I think like late Friday or Saturday. So pretty excited. We're going to be going to Washington D.C., which is the furthest part we're going to be going, and then Washington D.C., and then we'll be kind of working our way back, I guess, more or less. We have some shows in Pennsylvania and what have you, so it'll be fun. We did this tour last year, just about the same time. It was like exactly almost a year ago. This this tour is a little bit shorter, but it will still be fun. We also have a record, brand new album coming out later this year. I'm not sure. We don't have a date as to when it will be done or when it's coming out, but I'm sure it will be out. I would imagine by like the summer, but we'll see. So really excited about that. That's coming up next week, and I think we're going to be leaving out of town either Tuesday or Monday night. Not totally sure because I think the first show is on Wednesday, I believe, next week. And then tomorrow we have our Quantum show with my great friend Ronnie, aka Sonic Wallpaper, at Opera House Video at 1 o'clock. So that'll be really fun. I think this is like our second or third time doing the show. It's kind of a blur. I kind of forget. First time we played at Opera House Video, we did it solo. We usually do the show, and we've done a handful of them. We usually do them during the day, just at Opera House Video during their store hours. I look at it as a gig, but it's not like a typical gig, or like the gig that we played. We played a gig last weekend at Hey Sailor, where that's more of like a concert kind of a gig. This is more, I guess you could say, loosey goosey, and we're just kind of open. We're playing while the store is open, so we're kind of open to that too. As far as having it more loose and kind of informal. This is kind of a cool thing because we tried it last summer where Ronnie and I played Sonic Wallpaper. We did this kind of round robin experiment where we basically like traded off tracks and sounds off of each other like every 10 or 15 minutes. I remember we went into it. I kind of proposed the idea to Ronnie a while ago before we did the show, and he was into it. He was like, that's kind of a cool idea. We could do that. Like, and the idea was basically, it was actually from an idea that I had, or actually an event that I went to where there were all these singer songwriters playing together, but they did these tiny little sets, more or less, and they would kind of play off of each other and trade. Every 5 or 10 minutes, they would trade off, and then someone else would play, and then sometimes they would all play together, and it was I don't know, it was really cool. It was all acoustic stuff, and I thought, like that could be a cool thing to do, since this is like a very kind of laid back. It's I do consider it a gig and a concert to a degree, but I also feel like it's just kind of an open jam also too. So I thought of taking that idea of having this round robin thing and applying it to what we do more or less in this kind of electronic world. So Ronnie was really into the idea, and so was Mike. So we had a go of it, and it actually was a total blast. There was a lot of improv. We did play a couple of. I think we ended up playing maybe two or three songs, like quantum tunes that we have. But for the most part, we just kind of riffed off of each other and improvised. Somebody would kind of establish a mood or maybe a groove or a melody. They would run with it, and then we would, one of us would try to react to that or maybe kind of carry that theme on to someplace else. So it was a cool experiment. So we're gonna attempt to do that again tomorrow at Opera House Video. I remember the first time we ever played at Opera House Video, we played solo. We played on a Saturday, same time basically as tomorrow's show. And we just had it set up where we just kind of more or less played our set. We played for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And it was super fun. I mean, it was laid back and we just kind of played. There were like people coming and going, and a few people would hang out and watch or listen. During the All Roads Festival, which is a huge music festival in Belfast that comes every summer, they had bands inside there, which was wild because it's a tiny little shop. I mean, it's big. It's a big place actually, but to have bands or to have a PA system and all that stuff, it's pretty cramped. Luckily, like with what we have just enough room to kind of do our setup, to have our setup. Full bands though would be crazy, but they did have full bands in there. And I'm like, this is great because I always thought, well, for what it's worth, I'm like, this is kind of a dream fulfilled because this is I'm all about movies 24/7, so and that's what this channel is. So to be able to play in my home away from home at a video shop, it's kind of amazing. Plus it's, the significance of it, you can laugh at it, but it's the only video shop in the entire state that and Opera House Video is still going strong. And I've been friends with Dennis Howard, the owner, for a very long time. So yeah, if you're in Belfast, come on by. 1 o'clock tomorrow. We'll play. We'll probably play for at least 2 hours. So yeah, looking forward to it. Anyway, I have been hardcore in. I've been totally hardcore about Friday 13th as of late. Every year, I always sit through and watch all the movies. This time, and it's been it's been a cool experience because I've been watching them not necessarily in order. It kind of started random, as this kind of random thing, where I had gone. It was like 2 weeks ago. I went with some friends to see Friday 13th in 3D, Part 3, and it was amazing. I was blown away. And then later that week, I came home. Had kind of a weird week. And I was like, okay, I just want to. Came home one night, and I'm like, you know what? I just want to chill the fuck out and just relax. So I was like, okay, what do I want to watch? And the first movie I thought of right away, without even thinking of it, I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch Friday 13th Part 4 Final Chapter, which for me overall is the best movie in the franchise. So it started from there. So I watched that and I watched them right through, finished off watching my box set that's a part of. The last movie in the box set was Jason Takes Manhattan. So, and then I went back to watching the first two films. And last night I finished up watching Friday 13th Part 2. And I'm always, trying to think of ideas for the channel to keep things fresh. And I had this idea about a month ago of maybe doing deep dive videos where you take a movie and you kind of talk about it more in depth, maybe to a degree like you're kind of deconstructing it. Get into the nuts and the nitty gritty parts of the film or how that movie was made. And trying to talk about a movie that I know I've talked about before or I've done shows on. So I started this new, more or less, series called the Deep Dive series for Film Fanatic, where I'm doing that with movies that I just always go back to and that I really love. And the whole kind of series started with The Howling, which is my favorite werewolf movie of all time. And then I did another show where I did a deep dive on probably the greatest Bigfoot movie ever made. Well, it is the greatest Bigfoot movie ever made, Night of the Demon. I had reviewed that movie. I bought this beautiful Severin edition about maybe a year or two ago. Absolutely love that movie. It's just unbelievable. It's one of those movies I think you have to see to believe. So I did a show on that when I got the Blu-ray and I watched it. It's got an amazing amount of special features. And then I had recently watched it again, but then really dove into the special features, and I realized I came across some special features because there's a lot. There's probably almost 3 hours worth that I hadn't really seen, so I watched all that stuff and was just totally enamored with it and just loved every second of it. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll do another deep dive video on it because this is a movie I've done a show on, and I'll do it on Night of the Demon. So it's been super fun. And as a nerd, a movie nerd, I really love the special features component because you really learn like how the magic is made. You learn how these movies are made. You see all the highs and lows. You get the peek behind the curtain. What a lot of these filmmakers have to go through, crazy brutal schedules, trying to finance these movies, trying to get them distributed. And a lot of these movies are, super kind of underground, low budget. So the odds are naturally kind of, stacked against them. So it's always interesting to hear how these movies get made, and then a lot of these movies go on to become legendary in kind of the cult world of exploitation, especially Night of the Demon, which is like exemplifies that, I think. So I've been doing the same thing with the Friday 13th movies. Basically, I've covered these movies a few times. So I decided, okay, I'm going to do a deep dive video on the movies that I'm watching now. So I finished up last night with Friday 13th Part 2. And it's funny because with Friday the 13th, because it's my favorite series of all time, it's my favorite movie franchise, and it's also my favorite horror franchise, and also my favorite slasher franchise. So I look at it as there's like three tiers to how much, to where I put this movie. So after I finished up, and today's show is going to be on Part 2, Friday 13th Part 2. The last few movies that are on my list are Jason X, Jason Goes to Hell, Freddy vs. Jason, and then the Friday 13th reboot that came out, I guess, maybe 10 or 11 years ago, maybe more at this point, which is crazy. Which was the last movie that's been made in the franchise, which I really actually think it's great. And ironically, was the biggest grossing movie of all of the movies. So, and the thing is with Friday 13th, I can never, I have my favorites. Obviously, I would say overall part 4 final chapter is great. That's pretty much it. To me, that it's my Empire Strikes Back, or it's the Empire Strikes Back for that franchise. But I do love all of the movies to death. They're just the way I describe it. I posted this thing yesterday on Facebook about just about the Friday 13th franchise, and I said I described the whole franchise for me. For me, it's like eating a big giant bowl of really good creamy mac and cheese. To me, that just sums it up because it's just total comfort food. So much nostalgia tied to the movies. Obviously, it's the first Friday 13th was my very first horror movie that I ever saw as a kid. It was my very first slasher movie that I ever saw as a kid. For what it's worth, it changed my life forever. It made me into the freak show that I am today. So, and I never get sick of these movies. I literally do. But the thing is, like, I can't. If I like come home one day, say like a random night or whatever the hell it is, and I'm like, you know what, I want to watch Friday 13th movie, and I just I grabbed like part 4 or part 5 or whatever. I'll watch it, but then I can't. It can never, it never happens. I can never just watch one. I end up, and it could be from anywhere. This time I really did watch them out of order, but usually I watch them in order, starting with the original and then ending with the the reboot, the last film. And this time I obviously did it a little bit different. So, but the thing is, it has happened before. One movie, one time, the last time it happened that I can remember was one of the movies in the franchise that I really love. But I always thought it's the only movie I saw in the franchise. It's the only Friday 13th movie I actually saw in the theater, and that was Jason Lives. I saw it when I was a real little kid. I always thought that movie was good. But I've seen that movie a bunch of times since I bought this box set, and I really love that movie. I think it's really really good. It's actually one of my favorites now in the franchise. It's really grown on me. But that happened not that long ago. Well, it was probably the last year where I was like, I really want to watch this movie again. I want to watch Jason Lives again, and I put it in, and I was like, this movie is awesome. And then I'm like, okay, I got to watch the rest of them. And then from that point on, I just watched every Friday 13th movie that there is. So I can never, and it's happened before, I can never just put in one movie. I'm like, I don't know, I feel like I'm a crackhead or something when it comes to Friday 13th. Like, I can never just watch one movie. I'm like, I got to watch them all. That doesn't happen for me because there are some really great franchises out there. I mean, I do love some of the Halloween films a lot, and also Texas Chainsaw. I really love the Purge series because that to me is so. Those films are just super consistent. I think the Purge franchise is more consistent than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Also, more consistent than the Halloween franchise. There's some pretty bad movies in both of those franchises, but I think the Purge, each movie is just amazing. I think, and I want to do a show on all of those movies at some point. I need to buy. I only have two of them, but I need to buy the rest of them. But Friday 13th too, for me, it's a flawless experience, and so that's what happens every time. I get addicted to it. So that's what's happening now, but I love it. So part two is a great film. It's a really great sequel. This show is going to be a deep dive about part two because I feel like, well, it's an awesome movie. I think it's a great sequel. It was a movie that it came out in 1981. When Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller, when they created Friday the 13th, they had no intention or intentions that, or never saw it as a thing that this movie would become this kind of box office titan. I mean, this movie was so low budget, and it came out in 1980, and I saw that when that movie came out in 1980, it made like $78 million, dollars, which at that time, even by today's standards, would be a lot. But especially in 1980, for such a low budget movie to make that much money, it's really fucking crazy when you think about it. And it was released by Paramount Films, so naturally they were like, okay, we struck gold here, so we got to make more movies. And then the rest is history. And arguably now, the franchise is bigger than ever. The demand of it, the amount of people that talk about, I see it every day online. Someone's always talking about Friday 13th to some capacity, because I think there's going to be a TV show coming out at some point. I can't remember what streaming network. It's some company that is going to be possibly doing that. I don't know about that, but so, but it's still, if a new movie comes out, because now that big stupid court case, it's kind of settled, more or less, I think. If a new movie does come out, like an official new Friday 13th movie, it's going to be the biggest fucking thing ever. I really think that, because people like me, there's millions of people out there like me that have the same habits when it comes to Friday the 13th. So, and I don't think it's just a generational thing. I think obviously people my age that grew up, were born in the mid to late 70s and grew up in the 80s, and that are into horror films, like, it's a no-brainer. I mean, there's tons of people like me, but I was so blown away by when I saw part 3 in the theater a couple weeks ago. I left. It was funny. I left the theater feeling inspired, because there were people there my age, in their wheelchairs and their canes. But there were like a ton of young college kids there. I was like, this is fucking great. Like, all right, like, kids are digging the old school shit, like, it's great. So it's a wonderful thing. And there was like this, even before the movie started, there was this like energy in the room that people were just like there to have a fucking good time. Like, that's what it was like. So, yeah, it's a you can almost taste it. It's a powerful thing for what it is. So, but part 2 was a really great film. I remember seeing part 2. It came out in 81. I remember, again, I saw Friday 13th, the first one, and I remember I didn't see it. I was a little too young. I didn't see it in the theater, but I remember seeing it on VHS. I grew up watching all of these movies, the entire, catalog of Friday 13th movies, the entire franchise on VHS. It's amazing. It's amazing seeing these movies on Blu-ray now. The box set that I have, the clarity, the transfers are just insane. And I know there's like 4K versions of these films out there, but man, I am blown away by the quality. And being a movie collector, we are truly in this golden era. I mean, if you're a movie collector, it's kind of the best time to be alive, even though the world around us is kind of a tub of shit. It's pretty amazing. So, yeah, the quality is just unbelievable. Like, just watching Friday 13th and even watching Friday Part 2, really all of the films, the transfers are just incredible. So I grew up watching all of these movies, and I remember seeing Part 2 for the first time, and it really scared the shit out of me. Both the first films I think, yeah, there's a camp factor and a goofiness and kind of a crappy, a movie that is, all intents and purposes poorly made because these are horror slasher exploitation movies. So there's that, but they're fun and there's great kills and all those things. There's boobs, there's lots of gore. But I think as far as the films in the franchise that are kind of generally scary, like where they actually are creepy and legitimately scary. I mean, for the most part, right, across the board, these films they're just really fun. But I think there's a few movies in the franchise that are generally creepy, actually scary. There's some really great suspense. And as a kid, I remember seeing the first one and then the second one, and I was fascinated by them, but they kind of gave me nightmares, legitimately. And I think in the series as a whole, the first two Fridays, and then I think also the final chapter, are quote unquote like the scariest movies in the franchise, where they generally have all three of those films, but I think especially the first two, they generally have a really great level or high level of suspense, but and the kills are really fantastic. But they're actually kind of scary. They kind of reach a little bit of a deeper level. So it's interesting, and I've talked about that with horror films too, where you have movies that are just really great. They're more like popcorn movies. They're comfort movies. They're fun and they're crazy and all that kind of shit. But when you look at horror movies that are generally scary, it's kind of a different thing. And I think the list or pool of movies in the world of of the genre of horror that are legitimately scary, I don't think there's a whole lot of movies in that pool, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. I think a lot of them are just really fun, entertaining, and they're crazy and bizarre. But it's a different thing when a movie gets under your skin. But I remember seeing Friday the 13th Part 2, and the first image of, because of course this in the series, this is now the first movie where we see Jason Voorhees. And I remember seeing that image with him with the hood on his face. The first scene where one of the characters is in the cabin, and she's in the bedroom, and he's hiding underneath the sheets, and he pops up, and he's got the hood on with the eye hole. I remember that scene just being so terrifying as a kid, really terrifying. And even watching it now, it's still really great. I mean, the level of suspense, the creepiness, the actual scares, really really cool. And it's different too, like Jason Voorhees' character in this movie, because again, this is the first where in the entire franchise. He went on to become, well, I do think in the slasher genre and in the horror genre, the character of Jason Voorhees is probably the biggest horror icon ever, really. There's so many. I mean, there are a lot. There's, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Leatherface. Leatherface is pretty much my favorite. Jason Voorhees, though, is right up there, obviously. And there's a lot of great Pinhead from the Hellraiser films. Like, there's a lot. But I really think that, like, when it comes to that grouping of horror icons, I really think Jason Voorhees is like, he's kind of the king. He's probably the most well known. So I doubt. I don't think it would. I don't know. I don't think it would be possible. Every now and then, you get surprised by things, but I don't think it would be possible to find, like, if you were, had this situation where you ran into somebody and you asked them, have you ever heard of Friday 13th? I would be super hard pressed to be able to find somebody that has never heard of the film. You never know though. You never know. Because I feel like it's such a part of our culture, especially in horror culture. So, not only were the movies super fun and obviously very successful, a huge franchise, but so influential. I think if Friday the 13th didn't exist, the franchise itself, horror would be a completely different thing. It would be, I think it would still exist, but I think it would look different. And I think for me, since these movies were my deep, kind of introduction to the genre, I don't know. I don't know. I probably would have gotten into horror anyway, but I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. There's the possibility that maybe that wouldn't have been the case. Maybe I wouldn't have gotten so into horror like I am now and over the years. So yeah, that's an interesting Pizzowell. Pizzowell is a YouTube guy who's really awesome. He did this really great channel. Has this really great channel, but he did this really great show on the Friday 13th series that I actually watched. And we're close to the same age. I think I'm older, but I think we're kind of close to the same age. And he like described his whole relationship to the Friday 13th series. And it was so awesome because I'm like, I completely identified with everything that he said in every way. I'm like, yep, this is exactly how I feel, every way possible, in every way possible. So, you know, there's like that kinship. And I think fans in the franchise feel this way. There is like this family kind of vibe because there is that connection for people. And obviously it's mega, nostalgia based. But I think for movies to last a long time, for any kind of art, a CD, a band that you loved growing up, as a teenager, and you listen to it now, and sometimes you're like, okay, this album is still awesome, or this movie is still awesome, and then sometimes you're like, I don't know what I was thinking. I can't really listen to this now. And there is that, a big major part of that whole experience is tied to nostalgia. But things have to, kind of age well in order you know, for you to still want to have that experience. And for me with the Friday franchise, it really, for me, it just gets better. I enjoy it more and more now than ever. It's wild. And watching part two was really great because I realized I hadn't watched it in a while. But I definitely, that was one of the things that stuck with me, or came, that some of the feeling of when I was watching was like, man, I remember watching this movie and that whole, watching this movie as a kid and seeing Jason in this, with, this is all before the hockey mask, like watching him in this kind of context with the white hood and he had these like overalls, and he's a very different kind of a character in this movie. But I remember that, just that image of seeing him for the first time with the white hood, it like gave me chills as a kid. And watching it now as an old shithead, it's still like, okay, yep, All right, that delivers, and it's got it's got some. This movie's got some great kills. The most probably the most iconic scene in this film is the guy in the wheelchair who gets that hatchet to the head and then goes down the stairs. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. That's such an iconic scene. I love the other thing that I love about this movie, and it's a big thing in all of the movies. And I think the filmmakers in the Friday 13th realized that this was a cool thing, like a really cool thing to use and to do more of for the atmosphere is the rain. I love the setting of these movies. It sounds kind of weird maybe, but I guess, I'm kind of a weird guy. I love the I love the setting of where, obviously most of these films, or really all of these films, are set in the woods at Camp Crystal Lake or some kind of camp. But they're the wilderness, the woods, the natural kind of environment of the forest is such a major part of these films. I mean, it really is a character in really all of the films. The only one that where, well, Jason X, obviously that because that takes place in space, and I would say Jason Takes Manhattan. But for the most part, every movie in the series, and especially this one, Part Two, takes place at Camp Crystal Lake. So the that whole world is just, it's interesting because I find, even though you're watching all of these movies, essentially you're just watching groups of teenagers get brutally massacred. There's something soothing and relaxing about these movies. I mean, I go back to that saying of like, it's like a big giant bowl of like creamy mac and cheese. It's kind of how I feel about them. But it really is true. It really is. It's pretty funny. So watching these films with that environment, like with obviously the woods and the wilderness and forests being such a major part of these movies, where it feels like a character, or it is a character in the movie. To me, it gives the movies like this kind of quiet, serene kind of beauty to them, and they're kind of relaxing. And the other element I was going to say that I love is the element of rain. I love when films incorporate rainstorms or thunderstorms as a setting for the story. I love that shit. And that is a big part of these films. That's always a thing. And it was really, that kind of thing was really established as far as, taking a slasher movie and setting it in the woods, in the deep dark woods, in a, more or less a beautiful place, but in the darkness there is, murder coming your way, but incorporating the rain and the elements, thunderstorms. And it obviously just creates such a rich and thick and very dense horror atmosphere. And I think, the creators of Friday 13th realized the rain, just the rain aspect of the films and the wilderness aspect, that this was like a really big strength for these movies. And I've seen, as you watch some of these movies, you see that is incorporated almost more and more. Whereas, like, when you see the first two Friday the 13th movies, it's kind of funny because when the kills actually, when it's full bore and everybody's getting massacred by either Pamela Voorhees, Jason's mom, or Jason Voorhees, the thing that I noticed about watching them this time was when all hell's breaking loose, the rain stops. But leading up to it, there's all these thunderstorms going on. But I noticed like when you get to chapter 3 and 4, especially those films, the rain is major, and during the kills, all of the massacres that are going on, the rain is flowing. And I do think that they kind of picked up on that. Like this really does add this really cool atmosphere to the movie, and it really does. It really, really does. And I'd say, definitely, easily safe to say that when it comes to part one and part two, that the wilderness aspect is definitely even more so a part of the movie. But it's great. I mean, it's just it doesn't get any better. Sean Cunningham created with Victor Miller created the franchise, of course, but he actually only directed one movie in the franchise, which I know everybody who's into these movies knows that. But so that's a big change. But he unleashed this movie, and it became this empire, because he owned the rights and all of these things. But Steve Miner directed part two. I do believe Steve Miner has directed a few of the other movies in the franchise. He also did the House films, Friday 13 Part 2. He also directed Halloween H2O, 30 Years, That's Wild, which is a really awesome movie. He also directed Part 3 in 3D. Very cool. He also directed Lake Placid. Wow, very cool. What year is that? 1990. I forgot about that. He also directed Forever Young with Mel Gibson in 1990. That's wild. Another horror film, Warlock. He directed that film. My Father, My Hero in 94. Day of the Dead in 2008. Pretty prolific and pretty well known director who kind of worked on kind of low budget films, but then also bigger Hollywood films. Texas Rangers, which is hilarious. Night of the Creeps, which is a fucking amazing movie. I have that on Blu-ray, and I don't know why the fuck, but I can't find it. That movie rules. That movie's amazing. So, pretty awesome and amazing director. Pretty prolific. Worked on so many great classics, classic horror films. The cast is really great, also with part two. I mean, the thing is, this movie really you can really see watching part two the other night, last night, and it's something that's always stood out to me. But watching it again last night, even though I think this movie you could watch, that's the thing that's cool about these movies. Like they're really silly, they're campy, and they're goofy, and they're kind of terrible, but they're fucking fun as hell. I think one of the coolest attributes of all of these movies is you can watch any of these movies out of order. I really do think. I think you really can. You can go into any movie randomly and still, you know, understand what the hell's going on pretty quickly, where it's kind of coming from, who the characters are, what their motivations are, all those things. But I think that is really awesome. I think that is a really killer attribute for a franchise, because I think too often nowadays with franchise films, you know, if you don't know kind of the mythology or where these characters are from or what their whole thing is, to watch a franchise movie, you know, randomly for the first time, you know, like say a movie that you're into, like I would say, even though I think it's a really good franchise, the last one is absolutely terrible. But for the most part, the franchise is really great. I think, you know, like to say the the Bourne Identity franchise. They're really great films. The last one that came out, I don't know, a few years ago now, which was absolutely terrible. But the other films are really great. But even those movies, I think if you watch them out of order and you don't know about the previous movie and kind of, if you're not really informed about the story, it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense. I don't think, and that's a problem a lot with franchises. I think you need to. I think that's a major problem with the Marvel universe. There's a lot of films now. I mean, it's kind of dizzying at this point, but there are some that are good that way. You can watch them stand alone, but for the most part, if you don't know the backstory or this or that, and you watch the film, in a random order or films in a random order, you'll have no fucking clue as to what is going on. But with these films, with this franchise, it's really cohesive, and I think great franchises. A movie should be a movie on itself. Like you should be able to just pop in and have a good time, or really enjoy it, or be moved by it. It shouldn't be something that you're like, oh wait, who is this guy and what? I don't know what's going on here. How did he arrive here? How does she? How does her character? How is her character a part of this whole story? You should be able to just watch it cold, and it should be great. I mean, obviously, watching the entire franchise is going to make a difference, but it's a strength I think for Friday. Is I think you can really watch any of these movies randomly, and they're so fun, so fun. But the cast is great. The one thing I was starting to say is watching, and I've always thought this, but watching part two, it's probably to some degree the most exploitive of the franchise. Especially you see it towards the end more so. The climactic kind of ending for part two, because with the surprise of Jason coming back, where the first one he comes out of the lake. This whole scene is exactly more or less replicated in the second one. It's kind of funny how obvious it is, and I do feel like Steve Miner, the director, and the filmmakers were like, okay, we gotta do the same thing to end this movie because it worked so well in the first one, where people were shocked and surprised and did not see it coming. The music, the whole tone, the movie feels like it's coming to an end. The whole tone, the music, everything becomes very kind of tranquil or calm. It comes to this like kind of calming, or goes to this kind of calming place, and then bam, let's scare the shit out of people again and terrify them. And you do see with part two, they really did that. Like they basically took the ending from the first one and copied and pasted to the second one. It's pretty fucking hilarious. In the other movies, I don't see any. I mean, you do have it. I mean, because they're exploitation movies. They're trying to make a buck. So, but they're fun and they're trying to deliver the goods, give the fans what they need. But they're exploitation movies. But I don't think in the other movies it's so blatant and obvious where they're intentionally doing that because they were like, oh wait, this previous movie made a shit ton of money, so let's just replicate this particular thing again, so we do the same thing again. Like it's pretty funny. It does happen. No, again, I should say, no, I take it back. It happens again in part three, the same thing. So okay, I cancel what I said. It actually does happen. I don't think after part three it happens again, but they're exploitation movies. But that was one thing watching part two last night where I was like, oh my god, like that's hilarious that they literally just copied and pasted. But they do they also do it in part three. Now that I think of it, with the appearance of Pamela Voorhees. So okay, yeah, that's pretty funny. But the cast is great, super entertaining. You know, I do think really all of the actors that they've gotten throughout the years, all the people that have been killed off in this franchise is insane. The body count is through the roof. But all the actors they've gotten, Crispin Glover, Kevin Bacon. There's been some pretty amazing, you know, pretty amazing actors throughout the years. A lot of actors got their start with this franchise, and the cast again, really great. Amy Steele, John Fury, Adrian King makes a brief appearance back in the first. She's in the second one for maybe 15, 20 minutes. Also, Marta Kober, Kristen Baker, Warrington Gillette, who plays Jason in this film, who is officially the first Jason. Russell Todd, Betsy Palmer. They basically use clips of her from the original, but yeah, phenomenal movie. And again, like I said, I think in the franchise itself of Friday the 13th, it's generally one of the scariest. I think it really is. Jason Voorhees is kind of a different character. Obviously, I mean, in the rest of the films, he's got this, incredible superhuman kind of strength, and physically nobody can really stand up to him. But in this film, he is a little bit more. Even though he's obviously like this undead kind of supernatural creature back from the dead, he has this vulnerability. Like in some of the fight sequences in this movie, he seems like he's kind of a mortal person. Like he kind of gets beaten up a little bit, and he's not as incredibly strong and as powerful as he is in the other films. Because as each movie goes, physically nobody can stand up to him, not even close, and he just annihilates everybody, even when it comes to like hand to hand fights or combat. But in this film, he is kind of more human in that aspect, where you do see him kind of get beaten up and thrown around, and so it's interesting. But amazing film. So yeah, this concludes my deep dive into Friday 13th Part 2. Peace.